My name is Elizabeth Morgan. For 32 years, my daughter thought I was a poor office assistant, but I'm secretly a millionaire executive. Tonight, her rich in-laws just offered me charity money. They don't know I own their company. What happens next will destroy them. But before we continue, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and comment what city you're watching from. Now let's see what happens next. The boardroom fell silent as I clicked to the final slide. 23 faces stared back at me, some nodding, others scribbling notes. The presentation had gone exactly as planned. The Collins Industries acquisition, I said, letting the weight of those words settle, positions Morgan Tech for a 32% revenue increase over the next fiscal year. The integration timeline is aggressive but manageable. Thomas Chen, our CEO, leaned back in his leather chair. Elizabeth, this is exceptional work. As always, I gathered my materials, feeling the familiar warmth of professional satisfaction. 30 years in this building, and compliments still mattered. The EVP finance placard on my door wasn't just a title. It was a testament to every 60-hour week, every red-eye flight, every impossible deadline I'd somehow met. My office on the 42nd floor overlooked Seattle's skyline, rain streaking the windows in diagonal lines. The city looked soft through the glass, almost gentle. My desk was organized chaos, financial reports, acquisition documents, a half-empty coffee mug with the Morgan Tech logo. On the credenza behind me, a single-frame photo, Emily at her college graduation, grinning in her cap and gown. I signed off on 3 approval forms, each one representing thousands of dollars. Before checking my watch, 6:45, time to become someone else. The parking garage was nearly empty. My footsteps echoed as I walked past the reserved spaces. CEO, CFO, CTO, Mine Reed, EVP, Finance. But the car beneath the sign wasn't what you'd expect. No Mercedes, no Tesla, no BMW, just a 2018 Toyota Camry, silver, with a small dent in the rear bumper from when I'd backed into a grocery cart. I'd bought it used. Rain drummed on the roof as I merged onto I-5. NPR discussing interest rates and inflation. Numbers had always made sense to me. Clean, logical, predictable, unlike people, unlike the choice I'd made 32 years ago. The memory arrived unbidden. Me at 30, 7 months pregnant, sitting across from my mentor, Richard, at a coffee shop. He'd just told me about my promotion to senior director. "You'll be the youngest in company history," he'd said, proud. I'd looked down at my swollen belly, feeling Emily kick. "Richard, I need to ask you something. When the baby comes, can we keep my position quiet? No announcements, no press releases." His confusion had been immediate. "Why would you want that?" "Because I don't want her to grow up knowing," I'd said, the decision solidifying even as I spoke. "I want her to understand that work matters, that effort matters, that character matters more than a paycheck. If she knows I make $200,000 a year, try $250 with bonuses," he'd corrected. "She'll never really learn. She'll always have that safety net in her mind, the knowledge that mom can fix anything with money." Richard had studied me for a long moment. "That's either incredibly wise or incredibly foolish. Maybe both," I'd admitted. The neighborhood appeared through the rain, modest homes with small yards, cars in driveways instead of garages. My house was third from the corner. Pale yellow siding, white trim, a garden I maintained myself. Nothing about it suggested that the woman inside controlled an $800 million budget. I hung my car keys on the hook by the kitchen door. The same hook Emily had made me in 3rd grade woodshop. Slightly crooked but still functional. The house was quiet, too quiet sometimes, but that was the trade-off. Emily had her own life now, her own home with Rick in San Francisco. My phone buzzed as I set down my briefcase. A text from Emily. "Mom, need to talk tomorrow, important." I stared at those words, feeling an inexplicable tightness in my chest. Emily never said important unless something was wrong or different. Or, I typed back, "Of course, sweetheart. Everything okay." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Yeah, just something I want to discuss. Love you. Love you too," I replied in my bedroom. I changed out of my work clothes, the tailored blazer I'd bought at Nordstrom. The silk blouse, the modest heels, they went into the back of my closet, behind the jeans and cardigans Emily associated with her mother. I caught my reflection in the mirror, a 62-year-old woman who lived two lives, neither one entirely real. On my nightstand sat an old diary, leather-worn soft. I opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon, dated 32 years ago. Promise I'll raise Emily with her feet on the ground. She'll never know about the money until she's ready to understand what truly matters. I closed it gently, turned off the light. Outside, rain continued to fall on my modest house, washing away nothing. Emily called the next morning while I was reviewing quarterly projections. Her name flashing on my phone screen made my heart skip. Maternal instinct never quite trusts that everything is fine. Mom. Her voice carried that particular tension I'd learned to recognize over 32 years. Do you have a minute? I closed my laptop. Always, sweetheart. What's going on? Rick's parents want to have dinner, a formal thing at their place in Pacific Heights next Saturday. She paused. They want to meet you properly. I mean, the Collins family. I'd heard about them in fragments over the 2 years since Emily's wedding. Old San Francisco money, business empire, the kind of people who summered in Napa and wintered in Aspen. Emily had described Patricia Collins as elegant and Thomas as traditional, which I'd learned was code for particular and judgmental. That sounds nice, I said carefully. Another pause. Mom, they're very formal, you know, traditional dinner parties, that sort of thing. Her words came faster now. Maybe you could dress up a bit. I mean, more than usual. There it was, the thing she wasn't quite saying. I looked down at my cashmere sweater, Loro Piana actually, that I wore only in my office with the door closed. Emily had never seen me in anything that cost more than $50. I'll wear something appropriate, I assured her. Great. Okay, good. Relief flooded her voice. I'll text you the address. It's at 7. Maybe arrive at 7:15. They're sticklers about timing. After we hung up, I sat motionless for 5 minutes, staring at the Seattle skyline. Rain clouds gathered over Elliott Bay, dark and heavy. In my mind, I was 17 years old again, wearing a threadbare coat to a college interview, watching the interviewer's eyes flick over me with barely concealed pity. I'd built an empire to never feel that way again, and now my daughter was asking me to dress better so her in-laws wouldn't be embarrassed. The irony was almost funny. That evening I did something I rarely allowed myself. I looked through Emily's social media. Her Instagram was a curated gallery of her new life, cocktail parties at the Collins estate, charity galas, weekend trips to wine country. Rick appeared in most photos, handsome and polished, his arm around her waist. They looked happy, but in every photo, I searched Emily's eyes for something I couldn't name. Was she truly happy or just successful? Did she know the difference? I scrolled back further to photos from her childhood. Emily at 12, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a science fair trophy. Emily at 16 in her public school theater production. Stage makeup smeared but radiant. Emily at 22, graduation day, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. I did it, Mom, she'd whispered. We did it. She'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for State University. She'd never complained, never asked why we couldn't afford more. She'd learned to budget, to sacrifice, to appreciate what she earned. I'd been so proud. But then she'd met Rick at a networking event 6 months after graduation. I'd watched her slowly transform. Designer handbags appearing, country club memberships, a new vocabulary peppered with references to our place in Sonoma and the yacht club. She'd moved to San Francisco, taken a position at Collins Investments, married into a world I deliberately kept from her, and somewhere in that transformation, she'd started apologizing for me. Not in words. Emily was too kind for that. But in the hesitation before introducing me to her new friends, in the way she'd stopped inviting me to events with Rick's family, in that phone call asking me to dress up, my phone buzzed, Emily again. Also, Mom, Patricia mentioned they're having their housekeeper prepare something special, so expect fancy. Don't worry, though. Just be yourself. Love you. Just be yourself, unless yourself embarrasses them. I walked to my bedroom closet, past the everyday clothes hanging in front, and opened the hidden section in back. Rows of designer pieces I'd accumulated over 3 decades. Chanel suits I wore to board meetings, Armani dresses for investor dinners, Valentino gowns for corporate galas. Each one probably cost more than Patricia Collins thought I made in a month. I could show up looking like money incarnate. I could make Patricia's jaw drop. But as my fingers brushed over an $8,000 Chanel jacket, a different idea began forming. Why show them who I was? Why not let them show me who they were? I pulled out my simplest jeans, a worn cardigan, basic flats. If the Collins family wanted to judge a book by its cover, they'd get exactly the cover they expected. And when they revealed their true characters, when they showed Emily what they really thought about people they considered beneath them, that would be the lesson worth teaching. I opened my diary to a fresh page and wrote, Saturday Pacific Heights, lesson number 1. Character reveals itself in how we judge others. My phone buzzed again. A message from Emily. Thank you for understanding. Mom, this means everything to me. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 32 years of secrets pressing down. Oh, sweetheart, I whispered to the empty room. You have no idea. The week crawled by with excruciating slowness. I found myself distracted in meetings, my mind wandering to Saturday night. On Wednesday, Emily called again. Mom, I just want to make sure you know what to expect. Her voice had that bright, artificial quality I'd learned meant she was uncomfortable. The Collins are really into formality, multiple courses, different forks for different dishes, that kind of thing. I glanced at the invitation to next month's Morgan Tech Investor Gala sitting on my desk. 7 courses, wine pairings, 200 guests, including senators and CEOs. I'd hosted it for 5 years running. I think I can manage, I said gently. Of course, I didn't mean. She caught herself. It's just, Patricia can be particular. She grew up with all these social rules, old San Francisco families. Emily, I kept my tone soft. Are you worried about me or about what they'll think of me? Silence stretched between us like a rubber band pulled too tight. I just want it to go well, she finally said, voice small. After we hung up, I sat at my desk until the Seattle skyline turned orange with sunset. Through my office window, I could see the Space Needle, ferries crossing Elliott Bay, the Olympic Mountains in the distance. This city had been good to me. I'd arrived here 35 years ago with a finance degree, student debt, and a determination that bordered on obsession. I'd never wanted Emily to have that same hunger, that desperate need to prove herself. But maybe, in protecting her from it, I'd taught her to value the wrong things. My assistant knocked. Miss Morgan, the Q4 reports are ready for your review. I nodded, but instead of diving into spreadsheets, I picked up my phone and called an old friend. Elizabeth Morgan. Richard's voice came through warm and amused. To what do I owe this rare social call? Richard had retired 3 years ago, sold his shares, moved to Whidbey Island. But he'd been my mentor for 25 years before that, the one who'd understood my choice to hide my success from Emily. I need some perspective, I said. The dinner with the in-laws. You remember? You've mentioned it 4 times this week in our board correspondence, he said dryly. Which means it's bothering you more than you're admitting. I told him about Emily's calls, her careful suggestions, the undertone of anxiety in every conversation. She's ashamed of you, Richard said bluntly. Or rather, she's ashamed of what she thinks you are. The words stung, even though I thought them myself. So what do I do? I asked. Show up in Chanel and blow their minds. Prove that I'm not what they assume. You could, he said, or you could let them prove who they are first. Let them show their daughter what kind of people judge others by bank accounts and zip codes. That feels like a test. Life is a test. Elizabeth, every interaction reveals character. Ours and theirs. He paused. What do you want Emily to learn from this dinner? I thought about my daughter scrolling through Instagram, carefully curating her life for people who measured worth in designer labels. I thought about the girl who'd once cried when we couldn't afford a ski trip, then worked double shifts the next summer to buy her own equipment. That girl had understood earning things. When had she forgotten? I want her to remember what matters, I said quietly. Then show her, Richard replied. Not with words, with mirrors. Friday evening, I received a text from an unknown number. This is Patricia Collins. So delighted you'll be joining us tomorrow. Emily tells me you work in administration. I spent some years in volunteer committee work myself. I'm sure we'll find lots to discuss. Casual elegance is our dress code. Looking forward, P. Casual elegance? I almost laughed. I texted back. Looking forward to meeting you as well. Then I went to my closet and selected my outfit. Old navy jeans, a Gap t-shirt, a cardigan I'd owned for 8 years. Nothing dirty, nothing inappropriate, just utterly, deliberately unremarkable. In my purse, I placed my business card in a sealed envelope, my driver's license showing my Seattle address, and a recent Forbes article about Morgan Tech's acquisition strategy that prominently featured my name. Insurance, if I needed it. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Seattle. I flew to San Francisco on a commercial flight, economy class, my usual when Emily wasn't involved. The woman next to me complained about her demanding boss the entire hour. I smiled and nodded, wondering what she'd say if she knew I managed 800 people. The Uber dropped me at the Pacific Heights address just as dusk settled over the city. The Collins mansion rose before me, Victorian architecture, immaculate gardens, old money practically seeping from the stonework. Warm light glowed from tall windows. Through one, I glimpsed crystal chandeliers. I touched the envelope in my purse one last time. Then I rang the doorbell. Patricia Collins answered, perfectly coiffed in Chanel, her smile polished and slightly condescending. Her eyes flicked over my casual clothes in a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to see the judgment, the confirmation of whatever Emily had told her. You must be Elizabeth. Her voice was honey over ice. Please, come in. How lovely to finally meet you. The game had begun. Please, call me Liz, I said. Stepping into the foyer, the interior took my breath away, not because it was impressive, but because it was predictable. Marble floors, oil paintings in gilt frames, a chandelier that probably cost more than my Camry. Everything screamed old money, careful cultivation, desperate respectability. I'd seen a dozen homes like this at corporate functions. What a beautiful home, I offered because it was expected. Patricia's smile tightened with pleasure. Thank you. It's been in Thomas's family since 1924. His grandfather built it after making his fortune in shipping. She gestured toward the living room. Come, everyone's waiting. The living room was a masterpiece of intimidation. High ceilings, Persian rugs, furniture that looked uncomfortable by design. Thomas Collins stood by a marble fireplace, tumbler of amber liquid in hand. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost what Emily thought I made in a week. Elizabeth? His handshake was brief, dismissive. Patricia tells me you work in administration. Before I could answer, Emily rushed in from the kitchen, her embrace desperate and apologetic. She wore a cocktail dress I'd never seen, hair professionally styled, diamonds at her ears. My daughter transformed into someone I barely recognized. Mom, you made it. Too bright, too nervous. Rick appeared behind her, handsome and polished in pressed slacks and a button down. Mrs. Morgan, pleasure to see you again. We'd met twice before, once at their wedding, once at a brief lunch. Both times he'd been cordial but distant, the way wealthy people are with those they consider beneath them. Please sit. Patricia gestured to an antique settee that looked like it might collapse under human weight. Can I get you something to drink? We have an excellent wine cellar. Or perhaps something simpler. Something simpler. The condescension was so subtle I almost admired it. Water would be lovely, I said. Thomas made a sound that might have been amusement. No wine. We have a spectacular Napa Cabernet. 1997. Excellent vintage. I'm sure it's wonderful, I replied. But water is perfect for me. I watched his eyes dismiss me completely. To people like Thomas Collins, anyone who didn't appreciate a 1997 Cabernet wasn't worth impressing. Patricia returned with sparkling water in crystal that probably cost more per glass than my monthly water bill. We settled into stilted conversation. The weather, traffic on the Bay Bridge, whether San Francisco or Seattle had worse rain. Then Patricia went for the throat sweetly. So Liz, Emily mentioned you work in office administration. What does that entail exactly? 20 pairs of eyes have asked me this question in boardrooms, expecting detailed explanations of financial strategy and corporate governance. I've presented to Fortune 500 CEOs. investment banks, federal regulators. But to Patricia, I simply said, I work with finances and administration, lots of paperwork, lots of meetings. Oh, how nice! Patricia's voice dripped with that particular kindness reserved for the simple-minded. Like a secretary, executive assistant, something like that, I agreed mildly. Thomas leaned forward. How long have you been in that position? Over 20 years. He exchanged a glance with Patricia, a look I could read perfectly. Poor thing. Stuck in the same dead-end job for 2 decades. No ambition, no advancement, exactly what they'd expected. That's very loyal, Thomas said. Rare to find someone so content in one position these days. Emily's face had gone pale. Rick studied his wine glass like it held the secrets of the universe. I find stability comforting, I said, which was absolutely true. Stability in controlling an $800 million budget, but they didn't need to know that. Patricia pivoted with practiced ease. Thomas and I believe strongly in the importance of social connections. We're members of the Pacific Club, the Heritage Society, the Symphony Board. Networking is so crucial in San Francisco. Are you involved in any clubs in Seattle? No, I said simply. I prefer staying home in my free time. Another loaded glance between them. Confirmation. I was exactly as limited as they'd imagined. Well, Patricia said, standing with graceful finality. Shall we move to the dining room? Dinner should be ready. The dining room was exactly what I expected. Long mahogany table, silver candlesticks, place settings that could finance a small country. I was seated at one end, physically distanced from the hosts at the other. Another subtle power play. As we sat, Patricia said, I hope you don't mind, but I had our housekeeper prepare something a bit simpler than we usually serve. I thought it might be more comfortable. The insult landed softly, cushioned by false consideration. She dumbed down her dinner for the poor relation. How thoughtful, I murmured. The first course arrived, a butternut squash soup that was genuinely excellent. As I ate, Thomas asked, What neighborhood do you live in? Liz, I'm somewhat familiar with Seattle. I named my middle-class suburb. Ah, yes, he nodded. Modest homes, I believe. Well-maintained, though, I'm sure. Very, I agreed. The conversation continued. Each question, a tiny cut. Each response from me playing perfectly into their assumptions. I was the simpleton they'd expected. The embarrassment Emily had warned them about. The charity case who needed careful handling. And with every condescending smile, every patronizing comment, I felt my resolve strengthen. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson. The main course arrived on china so delicate I could see light through it. Filet mignon with truffle reduction. Roasted vegetables arranged like art. Patricia watched me navigate the silverware with barely concealed concern, as if I might use the dessert fork for my steak. I'd attended state dinners with less elaborate place settings. So, Liz, Patricia said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin, Emily tells us you raised her on your own after her father passed. That must have been incredibly difficult, financially speaking. There it was. The sympathy that was really judgment. We managed, I said simply. I'm sure you did your best. Patricia continued, her voice warm with manufactured compassion. But it's important for family to support each other. Thomas and I were just discussing how fortunate we are to be in a position to help. Emily's fork clattered against her plate. Rick's jaw tightened. I took a sip of water. Buying time. In my mind, I calculated the Collins family net worth based on what I knew from the acquisition. Approximately $40 million. Most of it tied up in the business and real estate. Comfortable, certainly. But I'd personally overseen deals worth more than their entire fortune. That's very generous, I said. Thomas cleared his throat. We believe in taking care of family, Liz. And now that you're part of ours, he gestured magnanimously. We want you to feel secure. If you're experiencing any financial difficulties, we'd like to know. The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of an antique clock. Financial difficulties, I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. Oh, it's nothing to be ashamed of, Patricia rushed to assure me. Many people struggle, especially at our age when retirement looms. We simply want to make sure you're not burdened, that you don't feel pressured to ask Emily and Rick for assistance. Emily had gone completely still, her face the color of the white tablecloth. Rick stared at his parents like he'd never seen them before. I carefully placed my fork beside my plate, aligned it perfectly. In boardrooms, I'd learned that silence was often more powerful than speech. Let people fill the void with their own assumptions. But Patricia couldn't bear silence. In fact, she continued, her smile growing wider, Thomas and I had an idea. What if we established a small monthly allowance for you? Nothing extravagant, perhaps $2,000, enough to give you some breathing room, help with bills, that sort of thing. You wouldn't have to worry about being a burden to the children. The clock ticked. Once, twice, 3 times. Emily's hands were shaking. Rick had gone pale. Thomas nodded approvingly, clearly pleased with his wife's charitable gesture, and Patricia sat there, radiating benevolence, utterly convinced of her own generosity. $2,000. She was offering me $2,000 a month, less than I made in a single day. I looked at my daughter, saw the horror and humiliation warring in her eyes, saw the exact moment she realized what this dinner really was. Not a welcoming, but an assessment. Not acceptance, but tolerance of someone they considered inferior. This was the moment I'd prepared for. The moment when I could end the charade, reveal the truth, watch their smug certainty crumble. My business card was in my purse. Inches away, one sentence would change everything. But as I looked at Emily's face, I realized something that made my chest tighten. She already knew. Not about my job, not about the money, but she knew her in-laws were cruel, and she'd called me anyway, asked me to dress up, tried to manage their expectations, because she'd been afraid of exactly this moment. My daughter had been so worried about them judging me that she'd never stopped to question whether they were worth impressing. I reached for my purse. Patricia's smile grew triumphant, probably thinking I was overwhelmed with gratitude. Thomas raised his wine glass slightly, as if toasting his own magnanimity. Emily closed her eyes, and I pulled out the envelope containing my business card. Patricia, I said, my voice calm and clear. The voice I used in boardrooms when I was about to deliver news that would change everything. It's curious that you mentioned money. I placed the envelope on the table between us, because I think we should talk about the Collins Industries acquisition. Thomas's glass paused midway to his lips. Patricia's smile froze. I'm sorry. Patricia's voice had lost its honeyed quality. I opened the envelope and slid my business card across the expensive china toward her. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Patricia looked down at the card. I watched her eyes track across the text. Elizabeth Morgan, Executive Vice President. Finance Morgan Tech Corporation. The color drained from her face like water down a sink. I appreciate your concern about my financial situation, I continued. Each word precisely measured, but I assure you, I'm quite comfortable. My base salary is $30,000 monthly, plus performance bonuses and 30 years of investment returns. Thomas's wine glass hit the table. Red liquid splashed across white linen. As for Collins Industries, I said, looking directly at Thomas now, Morgan Tech acquired it last year. The deal closed in September. I supervised the financial analysis personally. You built an excellent company, Thomas. The acquisition was strategically sound. The silence that followed was absolute. Rick had frozen completely, understanding dawning with horrifying clarity. Emily's tears spilled over, and Patricia, elegant, composed Patricia, sat with her mouth slightly open, unable to form words. The expensive clock ticked on, marking the seconds of their humiliation. I let the silence stretch, watching realization spread across their faces like spilled wine across linen. Thomas picked up my business card with trembling fingers, as if it might burn him. He stared at it for a long moment, then fumbled for his phone. I knew what he was doing, searching for proof, hoping this was some elaborate joke. His thumb moved frantically across the screen. I could have told him what he'd find. My photo on Morgan Tech's leadership page, my biography listing 3 decades of progressively senior positions, articles from the Wall Street Journal and Forbes mentioning my role in major acquisitions. $3.2 billion, Thomas whispered, reading from his phone. You've supervised acquisitions totaling $3.2 billion, closer to $4 billion now, I corrected gently. We closed the Sato Tech deal in January. Patricia made a small sound. Somewhere between a gasp and a whimper, her perfect composure had shattered completely. She looked at the business card like it was a snake coiled on her dinner plate. Rick had his head in his hands. I could see his mind working through the implications. He worked for Collins Investments, which was now a subsidiary of Morgan Tech, which meant his Soggy, whom he'd just spent the evening treating with barely concealed disdain, was effectively his boss's boss's boss. But Emily, my Emily, sat frozen with tears streaming down her face, mascara leaving dark tracks, not tears of relief or surprise, tears of devastation. 32 years, she whispered, her voice breaking. 32 years and you never told me. That pain in her voice cut deeper than any of Patricia's insults. I stood slowly, placing my napkin beside my plate with deliberate care. When I spoke, I made sure my voice carried no anger, no triumph, only the quiet certainty of someone stating simple truths. I never needed to prove anything to anyone, I said, looking at each of them in turn. I chose to live simply because I wanted my daughter to understand that work matters, that character matters, that a person's value isn't measured by their clothes or their address or their bank balance. Patricia's hands were shaking. Thomas couldn't meet my eyes. But tonight has been instructive, I continued, because it's revealed something important. True character shows itself in how we treat people when we think they can't affect us. When we believe we're superior. I picked up my purse, pulled out my worn cardigan from the back of the chair. The value of a person, I said quietly, isn't in the designer label they wear or the club they belong to. It's in the kindness they show when no one is watching. It's in the dignity they offer others, regardless of perceived status. I looked directly at Patricia, then saw her fighting to hold back tears of humiliation. You offered me charity because you assumed I needed it. You dumbed down your dinner because you thought I couldn't handle sophistication. You spoke to me like I was simple because my clothes were simple. I paused, but every assumption you made revealed more about you than about me. Liz, Patricia started, but her voice failed. I hope, I said, softening my tone slightly, that someday we can meet again, perhaps with eyes that see hearts instead of price tags. I turned to Emily, whose tears had intensified. I love you, sweetheart. I always have. When you're ready to talk, I'll be waiting. Then I walked toward the door, my old navy flats quiet on the marble floor. Mrs. Morgan, Rick's voice cracked. I'm so sorry. We didn't. I paused, looked back at him. He'd stood, face stricken with genuine horror at what had just unfolded. You didn't know who I was, I finished for him. But that's exactly the point, isn't it? You didn't need to know. Common decency shouldn't require credentials. I let myself out, closing the heavy door quietly behind me. The San Francisco evening had turned cold, fog rolling in from the bay. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in the salt air, letting the adrenaline drain from my body. My phone was already buzzing with texts from Emily. I couldn't look at them yet. Instead, I called an Uber and waited in the shadows of the Collins mansion, watching lights move behind the windows. I imagined the explosion happening inside. Emily's tears. Rick's panic. Patricia's complete unraveling. Thomas's shocked silence. I'd accomplished what I came to do. They'd shown their true faces. Emily had seen who they really were beneath the polish and prestige. But standing there in the fog, watching my daughter's pain play out in silhouette against lighted windows, I felt no triumph, only a deep, aching sadness that this lesson had been necessary at all. The Uber arrived. I climbed in, gave the airport address, and finally looked at my phone. 7 texts from Emily. Mom, please. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Please don't leave. Mom. Please. I typed back with shaking fingers. I love you, sweetheart. I always have. Take time to process this. When you're ready, I'm here. As we drove away from Pacific Heights, I watched the mansion disappear in the rearview mirror, its lights growing smaller and smaller until they vanished completely into the fog. 3 decades of secrets revealed in a single dinner. I closed my eyes and wondered if it had been worth it. The flight back to Seattle was turbulence and darkness. I stared out the window at city lights scattered below like fallen stars, my phone vibrating constantly with messages I couldn't bring myself to read. By the time I unlocked my front door at midnight, Emily had called 17 times. I stood in my small kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd made her breakfast every morning for 18 years, where she'd done homework at the table, where we'd laughed and argued and lived. and finally listened to her voicemails. The first few were barely coherent, just sobbing and fragmented apologies. By the fifth, her voice had steadied into something raw. "Why didn't you tell me all these years, Mom? All these years I thought, God, what does that say about me? That I was ashamed of you, that I cared more about what Rick's parents thought than about my own mother." The seventh message was quieter. "I asked you to dress better. I asked you to be someone else because I was embarrassed of my own mother. What kind of person does that make me?" I deleted the rest without listening and sat at my kitchen table until dawn, drinking cold coffee and watching the sky turn from black to gray to pale pink. Over the next 4 days, I worked from home, taking meetings from my spare bedroom office, my camera carefully angled to show only a neutral wall behind me. My assistant asked if I was feeling well. I told her I was fine, just needed some time away from the office. Emily texted every few hours. "Please, can we talk? I need to understand." "Mom, I'm sorry. I love you," I responded each time. "I love you too. Take time to process. We'll talk when you're ready." But I wasn't sure she was the one who needed time. I was on the 5th day. I opened my diary, the same one I'd kept since Emily was born, and read through entries from when she was young. Today, Emily asked why we couldn't go to Disneyland like her friend Sarah. I said we needed to save money. She hugged me and said, "That's okay, Mama. We can have fun at home." She's 7 and already so understanding. Another entry. Years later, Emily got into State University with a partial scholarship. She cried when I told her we couldn't afford the difference. Then she said she'd get a job, work it out. She will. She's strong. But God, it hurt to watch her think she needed to. And another. Today, Emily met Rick Collins. She called me breathless with excitement, describing his family, their wealth, their connections. I heard something in her voice I've never heard before. Hunger not for him, for the world he represents. And I felt the first flutter of fear. I'd seen it happening, watched her slowly transform, convinced myself it was normal, that young people naturally seek their own paths, their own identities, but somewhere between meeting Rick and marrying him, my daughter had started measuring worth by the wrong metrics, and now she knew. Now she'd seen the Collins family's true nature. Now she understood what I'd been trying to protect her from. But at what cost? On the 6th morning, my doorbell rang. At 7 a.m., I knew before opening it who would be standing there. Emily looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, wearing sweatpants and an old college hoodie, clothes I hadn't seen her wear since she'd married Rick. She looked young and broken, and so much like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares that my careful composure crumbled. "Mom," she started, then collapsed into sobs. I pulled her inside, held her on my couch while she cried the way she hadn't cried since her father died. Great, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. I stroked her hair and murmured the same things I'd murmured when she was small. "I've got you, baby. I'm here. You're safe." When she could finally speak, the words tumbled out in a rush. "I've been so horrible, so shallow. I cared more about impressing them than about you. I asked you to change who you were because I was ashamed of. God, Mom, I was ashamed of your simplicity, your kindness, your realness. I wanted you to be something else, someone else, because I was worried about what they'd think." She pulled back, looked at me with red, swollen eyes, and the worst part, you knew they'd judge you, and you let them. You let them reveal who they really were. You sacrificed your dignity to teach me a lesson I should have already known. I cupped her face in my hands. "Emily, I never sacrificed my dignity. They tried to take it, but dignity can't be taken, only given away, and I never gave them that power. But I did," she whispered. "I gave them power over how I saw you, over how I saw myself." We sat in silence, my small living room filling with morning light. Finally, I said, "Let me tell you a story." And I told her everything, about growing up poor, working 3 jobs through college, the determination that had driven me to success, about the choice I'd made when she was born, to hide my position, my salary, my wealth, because I'd seen too many children of privilege grow up entitled and empty. "I wanted you to earn your own way," I said, "to know the pride of achievement, the satisfaction of hard work, to measure yourself by character, not bank accounts. Emily listened, tears still falling silently. When I finished, she said, "Did it work? Did I learn what you wanted me to learn?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, saw the shame and confusion and genuine questioning, saw someone confronting uncomfortable truths about herself. "You're learning it now," I said. "That's what matters." We spent that entire day in my modest living room, talking in a way we hadn't since Emily was young. She asked questions I'd never expected, and I gave answers I'd rehearsed in my mind for 30 years. "Show me," she finally said, wiping her eyes. "Show me the life I never knew about." I led her to my bedroom, to the closet she'd seen 1,000 times. But instead of stopping at the familiar rack of Gap sweaters and Old Navy jeans, I opened the hidden panel in the back. Emily gasped. Row after row of designer clothing hung in pristine condition. Chanel suits, Armani dresses, Valentino gowns, each with tags showing purchase dates spanning 3 decades. On shelves above, hat boxes from Hermes. On the floor, shoes I'd worn to galas and board meetings, still in their original boxes. "Oh my God," Emily breathed, touching a black Chanel jacket. Mom, this must have cost $8,000, I said quietly. "I wore it to present our Q3 earnings to the board in 2019. She turned to me, eyes wide. "You've had this whole life I knew nothing about." I pulled out my phone, opened my photo gallery to a folder labeled Work. Pictures I'd never shown her flooded the screen. Me at conferences in Tokyo and London, accepting awards, shaking hands with CEOs whose names appeared in headlines, standing before audiences of hundreds. In one photo, I wore that $8,000 Chanel jacket, presenting to a room full of suits. I looked confident, powerful, completely unlike the mother Emily had known. "I don't understand," she said, voice breaking again. "Why hide all this? Why make me think we were struggling? We were never struggling," I corrected gently. "We had everything that mattered: food, home, education, love. What we didn't have was excess, and that was intentional." She sank onto my bed, still holding the Chanel jacket. "You could have sent me to private school, could have bought me a car when I turned 16, could have paid for a better college." "I could have," I agreed. "But what would you have learned?" "I don't know. That you loved me enough to give me nice things." "Emily," I sat beside her, "I gave you the most valuable thing I could. The knowledge that you were capable, that you could earn what you wanted, that your worth wasn't tied to what I could buy you." She was crying again, clutching the jacket. "But I worked so hard. I had 2 jobs in college. I worried constantly about money, about bills, about whether we could afford things. And you graduated debt-free because I paid your tuition. Every penny," I said. "You just didn't know it was easy for me. You thought we were scraping by. So you valued it. You appreciated it." "That's manipulative," she said. But there was no heat in it, just exhaustion. "Maybe," I admitted. "Or maybe it was the only way to teach you what I learned the hard way. That nothing worth having comes easy. That character is built through struggle, not comfort." We sat in silence. Finally, Emily said, "Rick's been calling. He wants to apologize. Do you want him to?" She shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. I keep thinking about that dinner, about how he just sat there while his parents... Miss... God, Mom, they offered you $2,000 a month like you were a charity case." "They showed me who they were," I said. "That was valuable information." "For me, you mean?" She looked at me with new understanding. "You let them humiliate you so I could see what they really thought, what kind of people they are." "I let them reveal themselves," I corrected. "No one can humiliate you without your permission." "I never gave them that." Emily stood, walked to the window overlooking my small backyard. "I need to change everything. My job, my life, the way I think about everything." "You don't have to change everything," I said. "Just priorities." She turned, and I saw determination replacing confusion in her eyes. "I'm quitting Collins Investments." I felt a flutter of pride but kept my voice neutral. "Why?" "Because I took that job because it was Rick's family business. Because it looked good. Because it paid well. Because it was the right move." She laughed bitterly. "Not because I actually wanted to do it. Not because it mattered." "What do you want to do?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Then help people, real people, not wealthy investors looking to get wealthier. I want to work with kids from backgrounds like you came from. Give them opportunities, mentorship, a chance to succeed without connections or family money. My throat tightened. That sounds perfect. Will you help me? She asked. Not with money. Not yet. I need to try building something myself first, but with advice, guidance. I stood, crossed to her, pulled her into a hug. Emily, I will help you with anything you need. Always, that's what mothers do. We held each other as afternoon light slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes that danced between us. In that moment, I felt the distance of 3 decades collapse. My daughter was finally seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time. I'm sorry, she whispered against my shoulder. I'm so sorry, I was ashamed. You weren't ashamed of me, I said. You were ashamed of not fitting into their world. There's a difference. Is there? Yes, I said firmly. And now you know which world actually matters. 3 weeks after the dinner, my assistant buzzed my office intercom. Miss Morgan, there's a Rick Collins here to see you. He says he has an appointment. I checked my calendar. There it was. Blocked off time I'd almost forgotten about. Send him up. Rick looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 weeks. His usual polish had dulled. Tie slightly askew, shadows under his eyes, hair not quite as perfectly styled. He stood in my office doorway like a man approaching execution. Thank you for seeing me, he said quietly. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same chair where Fortune 500 CEOs had sat, where I'd negotiated billion-dollar deals. Rick sank into it looking diminished. I've been trying to find the right words for weeks, he began, hands clasped between his knees. But there aren't right words for what happened, what my parents did, what I did. I waited, letting silence do its work. I sat there. He continued, voice thick with shame. I sat there and let them treat you like, God, like you were some burden we needed to manage. And I was embarrassed by you, by Emily's mother. He looked up, eyes red. The woman who worked 3 jobs to put herself through college, who built a career that puts mine to shame, who raised an incredible daughter completely on her own. And I was embarrassed. Why are you here, Rick? I asked, not unkindly. Because I need you to know I'm trying to be better. I've started therapy. I'm questioning everything I was taught about status and worth and what matters. He swallowed hard. Emily deserves better than who I've been, and I want to become that person. I studied him, this young man who'd been raised in privilege, who'd never questioned his assumptions until they exploded in his face. I saw genuine remorse, but I'd seen that before in boardrooms, from people who were sorry they got caught, not sorry for their actions. Show me, I said. Don't tell me you're changing. Show me over time. He nodded, standing to leave. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, the acquisition was brilliant. My father won't admit it. But Collins Industries was struggling. Morgan Tech's management has stabilized everything. You saved the company my grandfather built. After he left, I sat at my desk feeling oddly emptied. Anger would have been easier than this complicated mix of disappointment and cautious hope. 4 weeks after the dinner, Patricia Collins called. I'd like to meet for coffee, she said, voice carefully neutral. If you're willing. We met at a small cafe in downtown San Francisco, neutral territory. Patricia arrived looking less armored than I'd ever seen her. Minimal makeup, simpler clothes, hair pulled back rather than perfectly styled. She looked smaller somehow, more human. We ordered coffee in awkward silence. Finally, Patricia said, I haven't been sleeping. I sipped my latte, waiting. I keep replaying that night, she continued. Every word, every look, every assumption. And I see myself from the outside. See what Emily must have seen, what you must have seen, this ugly person who judged you for not wearing the right clothes, for living in the wrong neighborhood, for having the wrong job. Patricia, please let me finish. She gripped her coffee cup like a lifeline. I need to tell you something I've never told anyone. Thomas's father, Rick's grandfather. He didn't want Thomas to marry me, said I wasn't from the right kind of family. My father was a plumber. My mother cleaned houses. We lived in a tiny apartment in the Sunset District. I set down my cup, surprised. I spent 30 years proving I belonged, Patricia said, voice breaking. Learned which fork to use, which wines to serve, which charities to support. I erased every trace of where I came from. And in the process, I became exactly like Thomas's father, judging people by the wrong things, keeping others out of my circle because I was terrified of being judged myself. Tears spilled down her cheeks. That night I saw my father-in-law in the mirror and I hated what I saw. I reached across the table, touched her hand, recognizing it is the first step. "Is it enough?" she asked desperately. "That depends on what comes next." We sat in that cafe for 2 hours. Two women from similar backgrounds who'd taken opposite paths. One who'd hidden her success, one who'd hidden her origins by the end. We weren't friends, but we'd established something fragile and real, mutual respect built on honesty. 6 weeks after the dinner, Emily submitted her resignation to Collins Investments. She came to Seattle for the weekend, bringing business plans for a nonprofit she wanted to start, mentoring and education programs for low-income students. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd done homework as a child, and reviewed her plans. I made suggestions, asked hard questions, pushed her to think deeper about funding models and sustainability. She took notes furiously, energized in a way I hadn't seen in years. "This feels right," she said, looking up with bright eyes. "Scary, but right. The best things usually do," I said. That night we cooked dinner together, simple pasta, nothing fancy, and talked about her vision, not about money or status or impressing anyone, about purpose. As I watched her gesticulate excitedly about curriculum design and mentor training, I saw the girl I'd raised, the one who'd gotten lost somewhere in designer clothes and country club memberships, finally finding her way home. "Thank you," she said as we did dishes, "for never giving up on me, for teaching me this lesson even though it hurt both of us." I dried a plate slowly. "Emily, I'd do it all again, every difficult moment. Because you're worth it," she hugged me, and I felt the last pieces of the wall between us crumble. 6 months after that dinner in Pacific Heights, I stood in a converted storefront in a middle-class San Francisco neighborhood, watching my daughter bring her dream to life. The sign above the door read, "Bright Futures Mentorship and Education Center," in cheerful blue letters. Inside, Emily directed volunteers arranging donated computers, organizing bookshelves, setting up tutoring stations. She wore jeans and a Bright Futures t-shirt, hair in a practical ponytail, and looked more genuinely happy than I'd seen her in years. "Mom," she spotted me and rushed over. "You came. Did you think I'd miss this?" I pulled her into a hug. "Help me set up the welcome table," she asked. And for the next hour we worked side by side, arranging pamphlets and name tags, testing the coffee maker, adjusting chairs. People began arriving, teachers who'd volunteered as mentors, local business owners offering support, and a group of teenagers who'd enrolled as the program's first students. I watched Emily greet each one with genuine warmth, explaining her vision without pretension or polish, just pure passion. Then I saw them enter, hesitant and slightly out of place, Patricia and Thomas Collins. Emily froze. She hadn't expected them. Patricia approached slowly, Thomas a step behind. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry except her wedding ring. "Thank you for the invitation," she said softly. "We weren't sure we'd be welcome." Emily glanced at me. I nodded encouragingly. "I'm glad you came," Emily said, and I heard her mean it. Patricia looked around the modest center with something like wonder. "Emily, it's extraordinary what you're building here. The difference you're making." Her voice caught. "It's more important than anything Thomas and I ever did with Collins Industries." Thomas cleared his throat awkwardly. "We'd like to make a donation, if that's acceptable." He handed Emily an envelope. She opened it, eyes widening at the check inside. She looked at me questioningly. "Your decision," I said. Emily accepted it gracefully. "Thank you, this will help us offer more scholarships." I watched Patricia's shoulders relax fractionally, watched Thomas's rigid posture soften just slightly. They weren't transformed. Transformation takes longer than 6 months. But they were trying, and that mattered. The grand opening began with short speeches. Emily talked about her mission. "I grew up with advantages I didn't always recognize. I want to ensure that hard work, not background, determines opportunity." A 16-year-old student named Marcus spoke about what bright futures meant to him. "Places like this tell us we can be something, that where we come from doesn't define where we're going." I stood at the back, tears blurring my vision. listening to the exact values I'd tried to instill in Emily reflected back through this center she'd created. After the ceremony, during the reception, Emily found me in a quiet corner. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what? For everything, for every no when I was young, for every hard lesson, for having the courage to let me think we were different than we were, for forcing me to learn what actually matters." She took my hand, and for loving me enough to let me fail so I could become who I needed to be. I cupped her face, this beautiful daughter who'd finally found her way. "You did this, Emily, not me. You questioned. You grew. You changed. I just provided the catalyst. A pretty explosive catalyst," she said, laughing through tears. Rick approached, gave me a respectful nod. He and Emily had been doing couples therapy, rebuilding their relationship on a more honest foundation. He wasn't the same man who'd sat silent at that dinner. He was learning slowly to value substance over status. "Your mother-in-law wants to volunteer," he said to Emily. "She asked if she could help with the mentorship program." Emily looked at me surprised. I shrugged. "People can change if they're willing to do the work." Later, after everyone left, Emily and I sat alone in her empty center. Evening light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the tutoring tables and computer stations. "Do you regret it?" Emily asked. "Hiding who you were for so long?" I thought about 3 decades of secrets, of living smaller than I needed to, of watching my daughter struggle with challenges I could have eliminated with money. I thought about that night in Pacific Heights, the pain in Emily's eyes, the devastation of revealed truths. "Not for a second," I said finally, "because I didn't raise a rich daughter. I raised a strong one. I didn't raise someone impressed by titles. I raised someone who impresses through character." Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart." We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell outside, the bright future's sign glowing softly in the window. I pulled out my old diary, wrote a final entry. "Today I watched my daughter open her dream. She doesn't need my lessons anymore. She's become the lesson, mission accomplished." As I closed the diary, I realized something profound. True wealth was never in the bank accounts or the designer closet or the executive title. It was here, in this moment, sitting with my daughter in a modest center dedicated to helping others succeed. It was in knowing I'd given Emily something money couldn't buy. The understanding that character, not credentials, defines worth, and watching her pay that forward to others. That was the inheritance that mattered.